Have you ever wondered why babies breathe when they come out of the birth canal? I mean, it kind of seems obvious or natural, like we would just kind of expect it, but there's a few reasons physiologically that they breathe that I want to talk about today. So one of them is that towards the end of labor, most often, baby's heart rate will tend to decelerate a little bit, and that deceleration will help to raise the carbon dioxide level in their blood, which will be noted, or I guess like detected by chemoreceptors, I believe, in the carotid artery. And that detection of high CO2 will stimulate a gasp, which also is a mechanism that works in adults too. Even when we're not babies, as we grow up, it's still a mechanism that continues to work. And that gasp will bring in a flood of oxygen, and that will help to level out the oxygen carbon dioxide rates. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't detect low oxygen. It only detects high carbon dioxide, which is pretty interesting, I think, anyways. And another interesting thing that I learned this week, learning about why babies breathe, is that right before they're born is essentially one of the lowest. It'll be when they're at the least oxygenated point in their life, probably, so that they have that really strong gasp reflex in order to start breathing. And another reason why babies breathe, physiologically, why they're stimulated to breathe after they're born, is that when they're in the birth canal, they're squeezed really tight because they're coming through a really small area. And so their chest is compressed like really tightly. And in order for you to inhale air, you have to be able to expand your chest, which creates negative pressure that draws in all that air. And so when the baby's coming through the birth canal, their chest is squeezed so tightly they can't expand it to draw in that create that negative pressure to draw in the oxygen. And even when their head's out, they still can't really gasp because they can't expand their chest. And so as soon as they're born, that pressure is released off the chest and they can gasp and expand their lungs and breathe in, which is just so fascinating. And this is actually one of the reasons why breech birth can be a little bit risky, depending on how long it takes between the birth of the body and the birth of the head, when the bum's coming out first, is that having that release of pressure off the chest when the chest has emerged but the head is still in the birth canal can create that stimulus to breathe when there's no air for the baby to breathe in, because their face is still pressed up against the birth canal. So typically it's not super concerning if it doesn't take a super long amount of time for the baby to be born and they still are connected to the placenta. So that should be delivering oxygenated blood as well. But it is one of the concerns if it takes a long time for the baby to emerge. And then what was the third one that I was going to say? Just checking my notes quickly. Yeah, I think those were a couple of the main ones. And then another thing that's really interesting too is that when the baby's in utero, the lungs are filled with fluid, which we do have fluid a little bit in the lungs to have the oxygen exchange happen and that kind of thing in regular life outside the womb. But a lot of that fluid has to be expelled in order for the baby to breathe properly. And a lot of that expulsion of fluid happens in that squeezing in the birth canal. And so I've actually seen birth videos of the baby's head emerging and fluid pouring out of the mouth and nose. from the lungs. And so that is another reason why a natural physiologic birth is really good for babies. Is that's one mechanism that happens to help the baby clear the lungs and have a stimulus to breathe right away. And if anybody's ever been curious about why you can have a water birth and not have the baby like drown in the water when they're born, is that the pressure, part of what stimulates the baby to breathe, this was the third point, is the change in pressure from the fluid inside the uterus to also in the birth canal to the outside pressure change of the air will stimulate breathing as well. And so when the baby goes from the birth canal to the water, there's still enough pressure from the water to not yet stimulate that breathing mechanism. But then as soon as you pull the baby out of the water into the air, the pressure changes drastically enough that they're stimulated to breathe. And so once they are pulled out of the water, you can't put them back in the water. And yeah, I think that's kind of the points I wanted to talk about. Maybe not as polished as some of my other videos. I'm a little bit more spontaneous because I kind of just wanted to be outside to record these videos. But yeah, I feel like I just am so fascinated by learning about kind of the physiology behind why birth just makes sense and why most of the time it works really well. And yeah, the other thing too that I'll maybe just add quickly is that an important thing too to that the one of the things that's beneficial to having a baby still be attached to the placenta is that the placenta will also read these pressure changes in the baby and the baby's blood, and also the carbon dioxide oxygen changes, and that will encourage the placenta to download all the blood that's stored in the placenta to the baby and then start to release from the uterus. And so that's another reason why it maybe isn't super beneficial to cut the cord immediately after birth. One, because then you're cutting off a bunch of the baby's blood supply that should go to them, and it also kind of interrupts the process that helps the placenta to detach and things like that. So yeah, if I didn't make sense on any of that and you need me to clarify, or if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And yeah, if you have any cool stories about babies breathing after birth, definitely let me know. I always love a good story. And yeah, hope you enjoyed and maybe you learned something. Thanks for watching.